I apologize for the delay. We got off on a sidetrack, which is normal, but usually we wait until we've begun to get onto our sidetrack. That's part of Jewish learning. And if you are getting a feel for the idea that you begin a topic and then that leads you to a whole bunch of other topics, that's what the Talmud is. That's how Jewish learning is meant to go. Everything is connected. The entire world is one tapestry. Pull on one thread, and everything else will also be moved. It does sometimes make it hard to move forward. But remember, the purpose isn't to get through the material. The purpose is to let the material move you. So with that in mind, we're going to get to a particularly moving section of material. Thank you. Maybe I should be a rabbi. We are on 5.4, which is going to look like an issue that maybe won't seem so interesting, and we'll find out. So we are on chapter 5, Mishnah 4. And as our designated reader is out with family who is in town, we'll be going around the table, and you're always welcome to say pass. And do it over here, because we always start over.
No, please, because they are two good gringos.
Because I always start to my left, and I just realized that sometimes we don't make it past 2 or 3 Mishnayot of the day, so I don't want you to feel left out.
Yeah, it's the difference between new immigrants and.
Wait. So is that why you always sit over here, just in case?
Like a student, I always have in the back of the room.
Yeah, I'm born here.
Yeah, but you're not gringo.
What do you mean gringo?
Gringo is American.
Yes, he is.
I'm American born.
He's not. He's
No,
Egyptian. Half Egyptian.
Wait a minute.
he work here.
I'm born so.
Hold on. You stepped on a landmine. Because I have to ask you, what would make him less of a American, as a gringo from the term that was just used, than the man sitting next to him whose family came, Richard, can I guess, from Eastern Europe?
Oh, yeah.
From Eastern Europe in what, the early 1900s or late 18?
Starting in the mid-18s. From the
Oh, mid-18, okay. So 1860, so German.
The more recent ones are from Russia.
Okay, more recent from the 20th century Russian, exactly. So
you are by the definition of my oldest daughter, and Jewish was.
just remember, though, that the majority of Jews in Europe look down on the Russians. Now it's like some...
No, to the Polish.
Well, no, the Glitzianers especially, but yes, but the Lithuanians, ask them what they thought of the Russians, right? There was all the hierarchy of Jewish communities, but why would one extra generation, in another generation, his kids will no longer be Egyptian? So why don't you call him Polish? Why don't you call him Russian?
No, he's not.
He's American.
I'm a Lithuanian.
Or Ashkenazi. Let's say Ashkenazi.
So
Gringo is somebody who's not Ashkenazi. He's a Sephardi.
I'm not sure I'm following this.
So what is a gringo? You tell me.
Gringo is a term that's used from Latin America.
Just born here?
No. So Latin Americans use the term gringo to talk about people who come from north of Mexico.
Actually, the term came is that during one of the wars between Mexico and America, when U.S. conquered, invade, and stole all the land.
Yep.
One third of U.S. today that used to be Mexico.
Yep.
They wear green uniform. And
Yes.
they say,
Yes.
the green go, okay, go away.
Right.
So they say green go.
Remember,
go away.
Texas, right? New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, and California were all Mexico.
Colorado?
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
In
Right.
2 different wars.
Why you didn't plan this in geography?
1848, Fort was the first one,
Yeah.
almost, and after that, what was the next one? With McKinley also stole it more. Also.
Yeah, and then we stole the Philippines from Spain. I mean, we did a lot, right? We took a lot, and that's not even counting what we took from the actual Native Americans. But
But the Philippines should have been part of Spain to begin with, right?
correct. That's why it should have been ours to take. So I mean, yeah, we have taken lots of things from lots of people. That's kind of how our country was built.
That's
But-
why America is so popular in the world.
But our country has lots of different kinds of people, and I am very conscious of the idea of who is the American versus who is not the American. Even if you were a citizen, even if you were born here, this is a problematic issue. I sum it up by the question of when people ask, "Where are you from?" Right. So I'm willing to wager that Richard, you've probably never had someone ask you, "Where are you from?" meaning something other than a state in the United States.
Right.
Right. Which is what I've usually had, right? If someone asks me where I'm from, it's what state were you born in, what city were you born in, all of that. On the other hand, I would be willing to bet that the three of you have probably had someone ask you at some point, where are you from?
I'm always saying I'm from the South.
And if you say, exactly.
South America.
And if you say, oh, I'm from Orlando, they'll say, no, where are you from originally? Right?
Yeah.
They will immediately ask something additional, which, by the way, is something my children get asked.
Oh, yeah, that's
Right. So my daughter has now gone through many iterations of this, where someone will ask, "Where are you from?" And she says, "Oh, I'm from Orlando." They say, "No, where are you from originally?" She says, "I was born in Los Angeles." And they say, "No, where are you from?" And it's like, excuse me, at this point, are you asking this question because you're very interested in my family tree? Or is there something different between me and the person standing next to me that
She lost a lot of the accent. She used to
And
have a
the
much
it's not the
stronger
British
accent.
accent,
I know. I think
No.
it was because the British accent.
the color of the skin,
Oh.
the shape of the eyes.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
Oh,
Absolutely. So people ask questions that in many ways delegitimize Americans who are as American as any other American, with full citizenship, often native-born Americans that have been here for 1, 2, multiple generations because of their accent, because of the color of their skin, because of their customs or their culture, and it is deeply problematic. If America is supposed to stand for anything as a country, it is supposed to stand for the fact that we are all Americans, regardless of what we look like, and regardless of where I came from, or where my parents came from, or where my grandparents came from, or my great-great-grandparents came from. If I'm a citizen, I'm a citizen, I'm a citizen. And unfortunately, we have not quite reached that point,
Yes.
and we're still very selective about who we challenge on their Americanness. As I said, if somebody was standing next to me who looked like their parents had come from Germany or had come from England, and they spoke English without an accent, we would never think to ask where they were from, meaning where their original family came from. And that's a problem. And when we decide who needs to be double checked and who doesn't, it's what we call profiling.
The same idea with the Judaism. When you convert to become
Absolutely.
a Jew, it doesn't matter how far is your Judaism or who converted you or
Yep.
your grandparents. Going back to the Mishnah.
And yet, if we're going to touch on this, there are many synagogues where if you show up looking like you are regular Ashkenazic, that's fine. If you show up not looking regular Ashkenazic, oh, are you Jewish? Did you convert? Where did you convert? It's the equivalent of where are you from? And the fact that they would ask that to some people but not others is problematic. And the fact that the level of information required is greater for some people than others is also problematic. This is also an issue for immigration to Israel. The Jews, for example, of Abu Yudaya, the Jewish community in Uganda, who have all gone through formal conversion through the rabbinical assembly, through the conservative movement, they are still denied access to Israel. Now, if I convert somebody who is a WASP in the United States and want to immigrate to Israel, they still won't be recognized as Jewish, but they will be allowed to come into Israel as a citizen. Why is one group being given the option to immigrate rather than the other? It's not because of the depth of knowledge that was given during the time of conversion for each of them. It's essentially a form of racism. And this is a problem in our country. It's a problem in that situation as well.
It's very interesting because when I immigrated to Israel, I went to the Ministry of Interior.
Bureaucracy.
The week or 2 weeks after the first week for the ID.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me a question that was the first time in my life they asked me, like, can you demonstrate that you're a Jew?
Yeah. How can you prove you're Jewish?
This kind of question.
Yeah.
I look at her and I said, what? They in Uruguay always need to defend, okay, I'm a Jew, okay, and why? But never they ask me the opposite question.
Yes.
I look at her and said, what are you asking? because my parents are Jew, my grandparents are Jew. Like, what kind of question is that? She laughed, and I was very lucky that I had someone very open mind.
Yes.
She laughed and put me Jewish in the ID.
Right.
There's no more that category now. But
What do you mean there's no more of that?
no, they erased. I think they erased the nationality. There's no more about the differentiation. I think it was a few years ago.
You want to get married in Israel? You have to prove you're Jewish.
Yeah, but in the ID card.
I mean on the card itself.
On the card itself.
But in the file, it still says.
Yeah, but in the ID itself, used to write all the time there if you are Jewish or
Yes,
not,
I know.
or whatever.
But
And then they-
but legally, it still makes a big difference.
Oh yes.
It's not that. All right. So Mishnah,
So,
where we are all from, the same Mishnah, gringo or not. Would you like to read?
okay, so the gringo says. Rabbi Eliezer says there are two instances of lenient rulings by Beit Shammai and strict rulings by Beit Hillel.
All right. So we've been going through the rabbi's favorite lists of flipping Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai to being strict and lenient.
The blood of a woman,
Yeah.
the blood of a woman after childbirth who has not immersed herself.
All right. So remember, immediately after childbirth, there is a period where she is considered pure, and then she is considered automatically pure. But there is a mikvah requirement that goes along with the system. We talked about this before. And
Beit Shammai says it is like her spittle and her urine.
go ahead and do Beit Hillel because.
It causes impurity, whether wet or dry.
Okay. So here's the question: is what happens when she has finished the period of ritual impurity and she has entered into the period of presumed ritual purity, but she hasn't gone to the mikveh yet? So does the presumed ritual purity still cause some change in the status of her emissions? Or does the fact that she hasn't gone to the mikveh mean that it doesn't matter until she's gone to the mikveh, she stays as she was before that? Does that make sense? Right. And the issue here is, again, because the Torah says she is pure after that initial 7 or 14 days, it sounds like no other requirement is needed. That's where Beit Shammai's opinion's coming. But he knows that if she hasn't gone to the mikveh, it's not completed. And so he is trying to compromise and saying that it's like her spit or her urine, which the halacha would be, if it is still wet, then it causes ritual impurity. But if the urine or the spit is dry, it does not cause ritual impurity. He's saying that law should also apply to her dam, to her blood, right? That should be the ruling for the blood as well. And Beit Hillel says no, right? Beit Hillel says until she's gone to the mikveh, she stays as impure in all ways, and therefore, wet or dry, the blood is considered ritually impure. Make sense, the difference?
I thought that always because the birth is a process that you with a lot of blood and everything
Yes.
that you are very impure and should go to the mikveh after that.
Of course.
I'm
No, you are.
that
Right. This is
Shammai thought that if the blood is dry, it's fine. For me, it was sure that after that
should.
process,
Right.
that is so close to the death and everything,
Right.
with all the blood, that you always need to go.
Oh, so it's the distinction between lehatchila and b'diavad, right? So lehatchila in Jewish law, that means from the outset, of course, after the 7 or 14 days, you need to go to the mikveh. Everybody agrees that's what you should do. B'diavad, if you didn't go to the mikveh, it was closed for repairs, it was too far from your house, whatever happened, and now there is an emission. What is the status of that emission? And Beit Shammai is saying, well, yes, it should kind of be pure because the Torah says you sort of get an automatic purity. It kind of could be read that way, maybe, kind of, sort of. But it also, if it's wet, then everybody agrees it is impure, that it would fall more in the category of spit and urine rather than the category of blood. And that's where he's trying to compromise in order to balance out those two views. But he's only compromising if for some reason you couldn't. He's not saying you shouldn't go to the mikveh. He absolutely agrees you need to go to the mikveh. But if you didn't, what's the rule? Right? That's one of the great things about Jewish law is we don't just say what you should do. We also say what happens when you didn't do what you should have done or couldn't do what you shouldn't done. Couldn't do what you should have done. English, it's hard even for us native speakers. Yes.
What's the reasoning for why it would be different than spit and urine?
Because blood always has a higher degree of ritual impurity.
So it doesn't necessarily, because I thought spit and urine took on the nature of the body since it was part of the body until it came out of the body.
Well, both kind of do. I mean, blood can't actually cause a problem until it leaves, although a person who is menstruating, a woman who's menstruating, I can be gender specific there, who is menstruating would also cause ritual impurity through her contact with the rest of the world, but that's because of her status as a nida, as a menstruant. This is not a case of menstruating per se. It's a case of what happens during that window post childbirth, which is a special case.
Yeah, I thought the menstruating would cause everything inside her to become impure, like this spit and urine. If she was menstruating, would be
well impure. Doesn't the status doesn't matter? I mean, yes. So it's ritually impure, but when it's inside of her, it can't touch anything anyway. So if that's what you mean.
Oh no, I thought during that period she became impure altogether, like the whole body.
Right, except if she's during the period right after childbirth or with that little buffer zone. And in which case the normal rules are off. That's what the Torah says in Tazria, in the parasha. So that is there. But there's agreement, right? They don't normally argue. There's a part that they agree about. Or was there another question? No. All right, Richard, if you could read the sub-point 1.
However, they agree in the case of the blood of a woman who gave birth when she had non-menstrual discharge that it causes defilement, whether wet or dry.
All right, so technically we have two different categories of bleeding that can happen for a woman during this time period, or any time period for that matter. One of them is what we refer to usually as nida, and that is the monthly cycle that women have. The other is known as her becoming a zava, and there is also the masculine form of zav, and this is when there is a not normal, it's atypical. So for example, if her period is every 28 and a half days, and suddenly she's bleeding on day 18, that is not normal, right? That would definitely render her a zava. And everybody agrees that if it is in the non-normal cycle, that this is something that wet or dry would be ritually impure. Does that make sense? That the Torah's dispensation is only discussing the normal cycle that she goes through during the period postpartum. Okay.
And loose association connected with this, I have to get out.
What's that?
When they used to teach us dermatology.
Dermatology, okay.
The aphorism was, if it's wet, make it dry. If it's dry, make it wet.
I mean, if something's something with the skin,
Yeah,
right? If it's wet and it shouldn't be, then you should dry it up, and
Yeah.
if it's dry and it shouldn't be, you should moisten it.
right.
That's a good rule of thumb.
Yes, it works. Back then.
Okay, Eduyot 5:5, and we're going to go back to Yibum, everybody's favorite topic of levirate marriage.
Yes.
Everybody ready for a complicated story again? Okay. What's that?
The 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
4 brothers.
4 brothers this time.
Time is 4.
All right.
Why did the situation with the Sabbath is different?
Because when the Torah is talking about that special period after the birth, it's only talking, according to the halacha, it's only talking about the normal bleeding that comes through the normal cycle. But if there's something abnormal that's happening, then that needs to be contained as a possible source of ritual impurity.
During the birth,
No, postpartum.
both.
Right, but it's true as well for if you are not having given birth and you're just going about your daily life, and all of a sudden there is this discharge, that also causes ritual impurity, and that's where you count the number of days that it's happening are considered off limits, and then you count 7 clean days, 7 days without the discharge, and then you would go to the mikveh following that. So that's the rule for it during the regular course of time. Okay, 5:5.
In case of 4 brothers, whom 2 were married to 2 sisters, if those married to the sisters die, behold, these should perform halatzah and not enter into the levirate marriage with the brother-in-law.
Okay, so here's the problem. We already know that if the two brothers die, if there were only three brothers, that these two can't marry him, right? Because you can't have two sisters married to one guy. And because once the brothers die, there is an automatic status shift that they become already automatically betrothed, that you can't then continue to go forward because you would then be marrying the sister of someone to whom you're already betrothed. The real question here is, well, what if there were two brothers rather than just the one? And the answers that they're saying is, no, it still doesn't work because, I'm going to switch colors again, because as soon as somebody dies, a bond is made between both of the widows and both of the brothers, who then have to sort out who's going to marry whom. But the problem is they are both married equally to the two sisters, so neither one of them can actually marry them as part of Yibum. Now, they can do chalitza, which is the ceremony we've talked about with the shoe and all of that, where they say we're not getting married. And then if they want to get married, they can, but any children that come from that are not going to be considered from the original husbands.
Oh, really?
No, that's not considered Yibum anymore. That should get marriage. Make sense? The Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai agree that if this situation happens, we don't do Yibum, right? We let them show up. We don't do Yibum, and we just do Chalitza and let them get married to whoever they want to get married to.
And what happens if after the Chalitza they want to marry each of them with another brother?
Sure,
That's fine.
that's fine, but it's not Yibum, right? It's not being done as levirate marriage. It's being done just as I want to get married.
Just like Cassie, they couldn't just create a rule on who gets, where the first one would go and where the second one would go.
Theoretically, the Torah could have created such a rule, but the Torah didn't, right? The Torah simply says that once the deaths happen, the obligation begins, right? Dead, obliged. But once that obligation begins, both of the brides are attached to both of the brothers, and therefore neither brother can marry either bride. And that means that you've basically jammed the doorway. And because we jammed the doorway, we just have to cut the line and start all over again.
Isn't that somewhere where the Torah is kind of silent on is which brother gets who gets?
Well, exactly. And if the Torah is silent on it, we don't get to pick, right? We can't say, well, the Torah didn't tell us that there were any, so let's just say the oldest brother, gets the oldest daughter, the oldest sister. We could have imagined the Torah saying some rules like that, but the Torah chose not to say rules like that, which is relative, who then is able to be able to, or any living brother who's able to then perform chalitza. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I thought, if my recollection from the Torah, it says the brother is to marry the woman and have children for him. I thought that was it, right?
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's what levirate marriage is. That's what Yibum is marrying the widow in order that the child be born legally to the dead brother, that his line will continue with the new child. That's what the idea of Yibum is. But in this case, it's simply we're unable to untangle, and therefore you just have to cut it and move on.
Actually, you can make an argument about the oldest sister can choose the husband first.
Who can make the rule? The Torah or we?
The Torah. When I
Yes.
Leah say no.
In the Midrash, Leah said that she believed that she was going to be married to Esau, and
No, but also they say that.
maybe with Lavan.
Lavan said in our family.
Wait, we're going to paskin halacha from Lavan? We're going to make legal decisions based on his opinions?
No, but said that our tradition is
Yes.
that the oldest sisters
Gets
or
first,
the
yeah.
daughter go first. So we can take from there and bring an extension, like now the first time Rabbi did that and said,
Yeah, whoa. You're going to regret those words in just a couple Mishnayot.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, but I say, you know what? So maybe the oldest sister can pick first.
Right. So if the Torah had been explicit when talking about Yibum, but not the narrative, right? Not the story version, but actually the mitzvah when it talks about this, then yes, we could easily imagine the Torah having given us that kind of set of instructions. But the Torah didn't, and so we can't. Because once the bond is created, we can't untangle it. If the Torah had not wanted that bond to be made, it would have given us more explicit instructions. And so we are left having to simply cut the Gordian knot and move on. However, what happens if they go ahead and get married anyway? Right? Not two sisters to one brother, but each takes one of them, and they do it before the rabbis can talk to them. Right? They just say, "Oh, look, Shlomo and Reuben died. That's such a shame, but the widows, they need support, and we want to have a child to be raised, in the name of our brothers. So let's go ahead. We'll have a wedding and yada yada yada." And then after the wedding is over, the rabbis are like, "What are you doing? No, you can't do this." What's the result? Do they stay married, or do we say divorce?
Can you apply the concept that you say that the Akira, the Abar, the Akira, they didn't support you, the Abar, okay, you already did it, okay, move on.
Well, that's the question, right? So L'Hachila, everybody agrees. L'Hachila, everybody agrees, don't do it. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai are going to disagree about B'diavad, about after the fact. What happens if you show up and people already got married? Remember, you don't technically need a rabbi to get married. And so it would be perfectly possible for someone to get married without a rabbi telling them this was a bad idea. So what would be the result? And the answer is?
If they went ahead and married them, they must put them away, divorce them.
Right? But
Rabbi Eliezer says in the name Mai, they may keep them, but Beit Hillel says they must put them away.
all right, so the general rule seems to have been if they got married, it was an illegitimate marriage, and therefore they have to be divorced. They should not be allowed to maintain. And Beit Shammai says, they shouldn't have, but they did. We can leave it. And Beit Hillel says, no, right? Divorce. This needs to be separated because you should not have had this to begin. Because
Who wins this argument?
what's that?
Who wins
It's Beit Hillel.
Hillel?
Because
Wow.
the problem is, right, in order to make this a little bit clearer, I don't remember my colors, but the problem is, we're going to call this, Mr. K and Mr. L. K is technically engaged to both girls, right? So if he marries Mrs. P, he is marrying the sister of another person that he's engaged to. And that's not legitimate. You can't marry two sisters, right? Because he's engaged to her, he can't marry her. But if he marries Mrs., we'll call her Q, it's the same problem, right? Because he is technically engaged to both of them. He can never actually marry one of them. Like I said, it's because they're both running to the door at the same time. Nobody can get through. They're blocking the door. And so because of that, there's no way to unresolve it. Technically, he married a sister to the person he was already betrothed to. Remember, again, in Jewish law, betrothal is more than just, will you marry me? Betrothal is the first step of marriage. And so therefore, it is a stronger bond than what people think of in modern American engagements.
That assumes they die at the same time, right?
It assumes that they die and the marriage happens within enough time that they were both widows by the time the first marriage happened.
So,
If he dies and they get married, and then he dies and they get married, that's fine. If there's a lull between them, we're okay. But let's imagine the two of them die from the same plague. Right? No one's getting married while the plague's happening. So you wait until the disease dies down, and then you go ahead and have your weddings. That would be a situation like this. Imagine the two brothers are killed in a war, or killed in a bandit raid, or both get their boat sinks. There are lots of reasons why you might have two brothers die almost at the same time, and then that would create a problem. But yes, if one dies and then there's a marriage, and then a month later the other one dies and there's another marriage, that would be fine.
I also you said that after divorce, if they want to marry no matter what, it's fine also.
But it would no longer be Yubu. It would no longer be levirate. It would just be a regular marriage. Yeah.
Well, I don't think so. Why is A and C the same?
So A is the general statement of halacha. Rabbi Eliezer was saying, yes, but I heard that Beit Shammai had a different opinion.
Right.
And then he also knew that Beit Hillel had a different opinion than Beit Shammai, which is the normative opinion, which is the standard opinion.
Doesn't it usually just list Hillels and then we accept Hillel as being the norm?
Not an Eduyot. Right, an Eduyot, it's the tradition of how it was transmitted. That's one of the main issues with Eduyot. Excuse me. Too much tea, I guess. That's one of the main issues of Eduyot is the way that it was transmitted. Who transmitted it matters, because that's part of how we do it, which is, by the way, a beautiful segue to Mishnah 6.
It's a long one, right?
It is a long one, and we should be able to get, I hope, through 6 and 7 tonight, and then we'll probably call it a night.
Akavia ben Machaliel testified concerning 4 things.
All right, so we're pretty used to this at this point. We've gotten out of our Beit Shammai versus Beit Hillel issue. Now we're going to get another person who gives 4 different opinions.
They said to him, Akavia, retract these 4 things which you say, and we will make you the head of the court of Israel.
All right, so let's make sure we got the drama here, because we're doing a narrative version.
And this Akavia was from which school?
That doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter.
Right? So Akavia is apparently a great sage in his day, and he has 4 opinions that the others don't agree with. Everything else they're good with, right? But he's got 4 opinions that he has that are what he learned, that he was taught, and they tell him, you know, if you just change your opinion on these 4 things, you could be the leader of the entire Sanhedrin, right? You could be the chief among all of us. That's the offer. Got the picture for the drama here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
right.
That's what?
That's right.
So they obviously believe he's wrong, right? Because the majority all agree that his opinions are incorrect. So all they're asking him to do is come over to the majority, follow the majority, which is what you're supposed to do in Judaism, unless you know it's wrong because you were taught differently. That's what he's torn between in this position. Right? So you have to really understand that this is a very powerful tension that he is now being caught between. Right? He is 4 opinions away, which are rejected by the majority, from being the leader of the Sanhedrin. And all they want him to do is change his mind on those 4 things, which everybody agrees he's wrong with, or at least the vast majority agree that he's wrong with. So it makes sense to put it aside and agree. But
He said to them, it is better for me to be called a fool all my days than I should become, even for 1 hour, a wicked man before God. So they shouldn't say he withdrew his opinions for the sake of power.
all right, so to come back to Natan's opinion about bribe, right?
Yeah.
He is an honorable man, and he is very strongly in honor. He's like, I'd rather you all thought I was stupid than to do something I believe deeply is wrong.
I love this guy.
Yeah, although we don't hear a lot about him because you know what? He lost, right? So, but his principle is very strong and thankfully preserved in Mishnah Eduyot, right? Because what his opinion is if this is what I know to be true, how can I stop doing it? Even if you offer me, you know, everything, I know in my heart that I would be acting wickedly. Right? Even if everybody else agrees that it should be left, if I know it should be right, I can't change. And all the more so, he's saying, I can't change for my own personal advantage. Because then, even if for some reason I may have thought it was right, everyone will believe that I only changed to get power. And that's not what it is to have principles. That's not what it is to have the shmuah, the teaching that was passed to you and that you will then keep and hold.
But then he ends up getting exiled. So is it all right to change to avoid punishment?
We're going to come to the excommunication in just a second, because we got to get to the middle of the story first. So what are the 4 issues? What is it that he is willing to go to the mat for?
He used to pronounce impure the hair which has been left over in leprosy.
Okay. All right. That's it. Right. So remember in the section of the Torah, Tazria Metzora, it talks about the tzara'at, which is a better word than leprosy, because leprosy has an English meaning that is not the same as tzara'at, but it's the one that's been used for a long time since we started using English. But it's the skin affliction that happens on your body. And it can also happen in your clothes, and it can also happen in your house. But the question is, what do we say about the hair that is left over from the area that was affected by the tzara'at? And his opinion is different than the rest of the rabbis of what we do with that hair, right? The rest of the rabbis say that the hair that has been left over once the tzara'at has been cleaned is not considered ritually impure, and he says it is.
Makes sense what he's saying. Because for me, no, if someone's sick
Right.
And came from a place that was
Zarat, right?
Zarat, okay, unhealthy and unclean.
Not unhealthy. That's an important distinction.
Unclean,
Yeah.
unclean.
Ritually impure. Yes.
Ritually pure.
Tame.
So for me, the part is still the same because the same source, the same base, the same material.
Mhm.
It's not like it was transformed, so now become to be clean.
Of course it was. When the Kohen says that it is tahor, that it is ritually pure, it is. Right? Before the Kohen says it's ritually impure, it's not. Right? You don't retroactively say.
But the hair in the
side,
attic
yeah.
or on the floor.
Anything. Right? Anything that the Kohen says it's now ritually pure, it's now ritually pure. It doesn't matter what it was 2 minutes ago. Once the Kohen says it's ritually pure, and they do the ceremony, it's ritually pure. It doesn't matter that it was ritually impure yesterday. It's okay now. The same thing happens for any use of ritual purity laws, right? My hands were ritually impure. I did netilat yadayim. That's going to be important in a minute. And now they're ritually pure, right? I mean, really? Did I get the microscope out to check for whatever was causing the ritual impurity in the first place? Same thing for going to the mikveh. Same thing for doing any of the ritual purity ceremonies. It was ritually impure. Now it's not. His argument, I think, is understandable, which is it's still part of what was there. It's how can you say that isn't? So it's not that he's crazy for this position, but it doesn't follow the general rule for how we handle purity issues. So this position is logical, but not universal. Point 2.
2 or 3?
3, yes. It's his second point, but you're right, it's number 3 on the page.
And green, yellow blood of vaginal discharge, but the sages declare them clean.
Okay, so there was a very long discussion, which we're not going to get into tonight, of how you tell what that's coming out of that part of a woman's body is ritually impure and what is just biology happening. And the coloration is how you can tell the difference. And in his opinion, if it is this yellow-green color, it is ritually impure. And according to the sages, nope, that's fine. It's not ritually impure. You may want to talk to a doctor, but it's not ritually impure. So that's another point where they disagree.
So what is for the sages impure?
Well, I mean, things the red and the browns and the other things that are the more ritually impure.
As closer to red is more impure.
You can't make a general rule, but yes, I mean, to actually study Nida, you need samples, and this is part of formal rabbinic training to look at all the different colors and samples and hues and shades and all of that to be able to declare what is pure and what is not, what is ritually impure, in order that you can tell whether a woman can be with her husband or not. We don't just say anything comes out of there, it's ritually impure. Because you do that, especially pre-modern world, men and women aren't going to be together all that much. You need to be only saying that something's ritually impure when you're sure it's ritually impure. And
because it's the blood, it's related to the blood. That's why
it's blood or other types of discharges that may or may not be blood, but we have to make sure that it's not a discharge that is not an issue, which is why they have a color code.
So if something black, color black, it's fine.
You want to study? We can study Nida next if you like. But if we do that, I'll have to use like a color slides because it gets down into precisely which colors and which shades of colors. It's very particular. It's not an easy subject.
I think it would be more related to the quality of
the consistency,
liquid, the consistency of the liquid, more than the color.
But usually, what the rabbi would see would not be the fresh liquid. Right, it would be the dried on a piece of cloth, and Rabbi, what's the status?
Amazing.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another topic. Part 4 is his third point. I know it's number 4 on the list, but it's number 3 of the things that he wouldn't retract.
He used to permit the wool of a firstborn animal which was blemished and which had fallen out and it had been put in a niche.
Mm-hmm.
The firstborn being slaughtered afterwards, the sages forbid it.
Okay, you got a lovely little sheep. right? Your sheep is born. It's the firstborn sheep of its mother. Firstborn are dedicated to God. Yay! That means every part of the firstborn, including its wool, is dedicated to God. Boo. Okay. Some of the wool falls off. They shed. It's what sheep do. If I take that wool and then I put it away in a niche somewhere in a cupboard, and every time it drops a little bit of wool, I save it. And then that animal turns out to be blemished, right? To have a blemish on it, so I cannot sacrifice it. Then I can do a redemption and I can swap over, and now that animal is fit for use. And if I slaughter it, I can now use the wool. That everybody agrees on. But what about the wool that fell off before it was rendered unfit? And
it's the same with the Kohen and the previous part. When it's declared unclean, it's everything's unclean, so everything you can use it.
But it's no longer attached to the sheep when the sheep is finally declared usable.
Neither in Sharia with the hair.
It's the opposite then.
Well, kind of.
It's the same logic.
So
when it's declared something, it's something.
So he declares that it's fine. The wool you picked up and that you got collected is perfectly fine. And the sages say no, right? The wool that came off of it while it was still the firstborn and going to be sacrificed is always off limits.
So it's a contradiction with the previous Mishnah with the Sharia.
Because once it comes off, it takes on its own identity. That's the rabbinic position, right? It is now independent of the animal later, right? And once it becomes independent, its status is as it was when it came off. Right? I'm trying to think of an example from Tazri or Metzora. It would be like if they parts of humans don't come off separate, a hair of a human, I guess, right? If I am a Metzora, if I have the condition and I, cut my hair and I sprinkle it everywhere, the hair has the status of being ritually impure. Go to the Kohen and he renders me ritually pure. The hair doesn't participate. The hair is not connected to me anymore. So the hair stays as it was. It's still unclean.
Isn't that what he said in number 2?
Yeah, we say the opposite. We say that the hair on the floor also becomes
the hair in the skin where
on the skin.
Yes.
No.
No.
And also out of the skin.
No, it's the skin on the body.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's whether it's attached, it continues to change. If it's unattached, then it should.
That makes sense.
Right. And he's saying that once the sheep is good, everything it had produced is also good. And the sages are saying no, what it had produced when it was still off limits stays off limits forever. Make sense? Okay. Number 5, which is his last point.
He used to say, a woman proselyte and a freed slave woman are not made to drink of the bitter waters. But the sages say, they are made to drink.
Okay. So the issue of sota from the book of Numbers is if you have a suspected adulteress, we make a particular mixture of water and using soil from under the Mishkan or later in the temple. We take a particular scroll, we write a certain passage on it, the ink gets erased into the water, and then we make her drink as a way of testing to see whether or not she had actually committed adultery or not. It's a lot more complicated than that. Someday we should study Mishnah Sota. But suffice it to say, that is the way the ceremony goes. The question becomes, what happens if somebody is not native born? Remember, we had this discussion just before we began. Does it apply to her as well? If she is a convert, then the Torah says that this is what happens to the children of Israel. Well, she's not technically a descendant of Jacob.
But she was converted to be descendant of Abraham and Sarah.
So, and what do the sages say? The sages say she converted, she is a descendant, and he's saying, yeah, kind of, sort of, no. Why is he being more particular here? Because it involves erasing God's name. When you take that scroll and you put it into the water, one of the words written on the scroll is God's name. And we only erase God's name for this reason, right? There's no other reason why we ever erase God's name. So can I erase God's name if I'm not 100% absolutely sure that this is what the Torah wanted me to do? right? Because if the Torah said only the children of Israel, I'm not going to erase God on a maybe. That's Akavia's position. And the sages say, no, she converted. She is one of the children of Israel. We do it like we do it for everyone else. There's no question asked here, which is, of course, the winning position. But you can see why he is very hesitant to erase God's name on what he feels is a maybe. He doesn't mind, considering converts as equal in every other respect, but when it comes to erasing Yud Hey and Vav Hey, that's not something he's willing to do. Make sense? Okay. But now we actually get a little bit of a proof.
They said to him, it happened in the case of Carchemish,
Mm-hmm.
a freed slave woman who was in Jerusalem, that Shammai and
Avtalion. Mm-hmm.
made her drink.
All right. So those were, if you remember, the people who taught Hillel and Shammai, the original Hillel and Shammai, not their bait Hillel and Shammai. They were the pair that preceded them. And so they're saying, wait, we got a story that there was a woman who was a freed slave woman, right, which remember was also the category that he said no. And we all saw, right, or at least we have story that we saw her do this. So if they made her drink, then what are you complaining about? And what's his answer?
He said to them, they made her drink an example and not the real water.
It was fake.
What?
They did it
How did he know it was fake?
because he can't imagine that they would have actually done it with the real scroll. So they must have done a switcheroo and not actually done the right scroll, or something else they did was different in order that they didn't have to erase God's name, but they still went through with the ceremony, at least on the surface. They made it look like it was the real ceremony. So that's his, well, yeah, and so we can begin to see a little bit of the crack in his character with this back and forth, which is whenever somebody is always willing to find an excuse for why they're not wrong, no matter what proof you bring, then they're not actually engaged in discussion. They're just engaged in proving themselves right, right? And that's a bit of a character flaw. It's not a huge one, but it is at least a glimmer of what might be an issue of him being the new head of the Sanhedrin. Question?
I was gonna say, isn't that like a really bad thing to do, to pretend to do a mitzvah when you're really not doing it? Because then you would fool the rest of the community, and now you have a false precedent.
Well, you have what appears to be a false precedent, but don't worry, he can tell that it was fake, right? Which is always the problem of no, that one was fake. Then what good is any precedent?
But I mean,
Right? Anything that happens, someone can say, oh, I know it looked like that's what they did, but they didn't really. All precedent falls apart under that kind of logic.
But if you have the ruling that says you don't do false precedents,
Mhm.
that would be proof that they probably didn't do a false precedent.
I couldn't even imagine them doing that. See, in Jerusalem, you were there.
Yeah, but there is also an issue of what the purpose was for the Sota ritual. Remember, the purpose of the Sota ritual was to reconcile husband and wife. And therefore, to do something that may not have been normal, but could help bring them back together, well, that was the whole point of having the ritual in the first place. And if you didn't do that, then there would be no way to reconcile the husband and wife, and you would be, in a huge family problem. So for them to do something extraordinary is not totally unreasonable in order to reconcile. What I would like to point out is that they can only remember one case of a freed slave woman who was suspected of an adultery, which means all the other cases were women who were born free and still fooled around, or at least were suspected of fooling around. So I like to imagine that means that these freed slave women must have been of upstanding character on average for there only to be one example of any one that might have gone up. And you may also notice they don't mention anybody who was a convert ever being brought up on this issue. So yay for our free slaves and converts.
I thought we went over this in Parsha, though. You said this was something that was not to be used very much.
Correct. Absolutely. Right. The whole idea of the Sota ritual, the rabbis felt was very problematic and was reflected very badly on the husband. But it still was on the books up until a certain point. Before the temple was destroyed, the rabbis had already said, we're not doing this anymore. Again, maybe we should study Sota as another Masechta, because it has a lot of interesting historical issues.
I'd like to think there wasn't a lot of, I know obviously it was some, but I'd like to think there wasn't a lot of slaves in the Jewish community back then. Well, at least within the Pharisees.
There were plenty. I mean, it's not like the majority of the population, but it wasn't rare. But it did definitely peter out. It died out as no longer a common activity.
This is the first time I can remember seeing a slave in that period of time.
Oh,
in
no.
In the Jewish community.
No. It was not. It was not uncommon at all. It was not like, it wasn't like everybody had them. And again, remember the slavery at the time was nothing like the chattel slavery of America. So it wasn't as harsh and as brutal and bestial as what we did to the Africans in American slavery history. But it still was slavery.
I just can't think of like Akiva or Hillel or anyone saying they sent their slave to go give them some water or something.
So we have at least one very clear case of Rabban Gamliel of having a slave, Toby, who he treated very differently than you would expect a slave to be treated. But yeah, we do definitely know that at least some of them had slaves. Okay, so we're got to get to the punchline.
Whereupon they excommunicated him, and he died while he was under excommunication, and the court stoned his coffin.
Okay.
Was head of the Sanhedrin or excommunicated
A little extreme?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what's going to be important here, right? Is wait, on what grounds would they excommunicate him?
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't retract his 4 opinions? But we just have had, what are we on, chapter 5? We've had 5 chapters of people who had opinions that the majority didn't agree with. I mean, what's all the Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai stuff we've been doing? We just had a whole passage where it said they didn't excommunicate each other. They married each other's families. So how could he be excommunicated for this? And then shamed even as he died, that they would stone his coffin on its way to burial and put that's harsh. That's harsh. Which is why
when someone asked to be head of the Sanhedrin, means he was a big teacher.
He, in every other way, he was macher, exactly. So that's why there is a correction in the next section.
Oh, so Rabbi Judah said, God forbid that one should say that Akavia was excommunicated, for the courtyard is never locked for any man in Israel who has equal to Akavia ben
Mahalalel.
in wisdom and the fear of sin.
He's like, whoa. No. You got that report wrong. Again, we always keep the minority report in order to show sometimes when it's wrong. And he says that was not a caveat that story was about, right? He was not executed. I mean, God willing, we should have more people like this guy. He was amazing in wisdom as well as in awe of God. This is a good person and a role model, not somebody that we're going to put under cherem, that we're going to excommunicate. Instead, who was the story about?
But whom did they excommunicate? Eliezer the son of Anuch, who cast doubt against the laws concerning the purifying of hands.
Okay. The issue of the hand purity, of tamei yadayim, when your hands become ritually impure, is not explicit in the Torah. It is a concept that is based in or invented by, depending upon your political allegiance, by the Chachamim, by the sages, by the rabbis. For somebody to say, I don't agree with the rules about hand washing, not a point of it, but the whole issue is I don't think is right, is basically like saying all of rabbinic Judaism's authority is false. That got a guy excommunicated, right? So there's a difference between, and this is the really, really important part of this particular Mishnah. There is a difference between saying, I disagree with detail 1.245, and I disagree whether we do anything that you're talking about, or that you have the authority to make the points that you're making. What Akavia said was, I disagree with points 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want to make sure I got Eliezer ben Hanoch, what he was disagreeing with was, I think the rabbis just made up this whole hand washing thing. Once you're willing to say the rabbis made up right, you're out of the game. Right? That is not, we disagree. That is, we are playing a different game.
So why the rabbi created the washing line?
That's another class.
Oh, okay.
It's a whole nother topic because we're already running late from where I hoped we'd be tonight. But we can talk about that another time. But it was a good reason, and they have good grounds for doing it. Another time.
No, and the introduction of 30 seconds.
No, this is, because we got to get. I really hope we can do 5/7. What's that? Because 5/7 is not very long, and we got to do 5/7 tonight. Otherwise, I'll go crazy. So anyway, part 8.
We crazy the whole week without the answer.
But the other one is easy to look up. 5/7, you're not going to get anywhere else.
And when he died, the court sent and laid a stone on his coffin.
And go ahead in part 8.
This teaches that whoever is communicated and dies while under excommunication, his coffin is stoned.
All right, so that we don't kill a person because they're excommunicated, but we do put a symbol of busha, of shame, on a person who
So they would not-
was excommunicated when they died.
So
And
if they were excommunicated, Rabbi, would the children be affected? Would they not be considered Jews? Or?
no. That doesn't work. It doesn't work like Christian excommunication, right? It doesn't change the status of the family. It doesn't change anything else. It would change his interactions with other people, and that would be very hard. But it doesn't have the other status. All right.
So the wife can keep being married with him.
Yes.
Excommunicated?
Yes.
Will he
And
still
she's allowed to still talk to other people and interact with other people as well.
will he still be considered a Jew? And
Yes,
will he have a
absolutely.
Jewish burial?
He would have had a Jewish burial, but they would have also put a rock on his grave,
Oh, God.
right? So it was a symbolic stoning at the end. Yes.
Oh,
So
So how
To
this?
file someone like that, though. But he's dead. He can no longer.
but the excommunication.
Well, he never changed.
Exactly. Excommunication is a cherem is about the community, not about the individual.
But how would that help the community to kind of?
For people to know that if you die like this, the community will still remember and disgrace you. I know it's a modern thing to think we don't care what other people think about us when we're dead, but we do.
Yeah, I know we
And-
do, but it just seems like it'd be like kind of mean.
It does feel mean unless there's a reason for it, right? If I went into a graveyard and spat on someone's grave, most of you would probably think that was pretty mean. If I went into a graveyard and I spat on Hitler's grave, most of you would probably think that was an appropriate gesture, right? You probably wouldn't think, oh, come on, hasn't he suffered enough? You might, in some idealized world, say, no, we should love everybody and we should forgive everyone. But you'd probably also realize that there is a value to a society for saying, this we hate. This is not who we are,
We're not going to.
right? This is
do
wrong.
How much can you hate somebody for not agreeing with you?
Again, it's not that he didn't agree with it. Is he basically challenged the entire underpinning of how Judaism works. It'd be the equivalent in the modern world, which people are a bit more aware of and sensitive of. If someone was to come into the congregation and say, I think Jesus was the Messiah of the Jews.
Yeah.
We would say, please leave, right? If you want to sit there and believe that privately, yeah, we're not going to come and put you under a lie detector. But if you try to teach that to other people, if you try to share that in our community, we will show you the door.
Right? But I wouldn't want to put something on the grave that.
No, because I wouldn't, be in their community to bury them. But you can understand that if you're in a closed community where you don't have the option of leaving and going to another community,
Yeah, that's very different.
you had an obligation within your community to make sure that the boundaries of the community were very sharp and very clear, because we were trapped in this boat together. I know the community idea was very different back then than the way the average person thinks of it now. Right? The average person thinks of community now as voluntary association. Right? If I'm part of a community, that's my choice. If I'm not part of a community, it's my choice. And you can tell me not to be part of the community, that's your choice. But if I walk away from the community, then we're separate. We were tied together.
Distance.
It's like-
small.
It's like, imagine 500 people who were all roped together and then put in the middle of an ocean. And one person decides they want to swim this way, and the other 400 want to swim this way. That guy we're going to have to deal with. Dude, you're hurting all of us by choosing to go that way. I know you think I'm free, I should choose my own direction. But you're pulling on us, and you're going to cause us trouble if you keep going that way. That's what cherem was about. It wasn't about, the issues of, salvation and redemption and all the stuff that got tied up in Western Europe with excommunication. or which pope you liked. It was all about whether or not you are tearing the community in different directions. And that was something that had to be fixed. And it had to be demonstrated to the community that it had been serious and dealt with. And we should be thankful that they weren't killing the guy for what he had done, which might have been a common activity in many other communities, which did murder people who didn't agree with the group.
So can we remove the stone after, like, let's say 8 years?
You're really worried about this. Let me.
How can he keep living there married with a wife with the kids, the wife and the kids still in the community,
Right.
he's still in the same community and
Yes.
being outside the community? Like, how could you be in and out at the same time?
Because they still want him back.
But they excommunicated him, so the community
No. Excommunication isn't permanent.
is temporary.
It's-
They can change
Absolutely.
if he changed his mind.
Of course. Change your mind and we'll take you back in like that. Right? Cherem was always temporary, or supposed to be temporary.
So he can come and say to Rabbi, you know what, Rabbi, I was wrong.
Yeah. Netilat Yadayim, greatest thing ever. The rabbis were perfectly right for doing this. Where do I sign up? And they would say, great, welcome back, hugs and kisses, and everything is
And
fine.
what if they move to a different community that no one knows that he is communicating?
Well, I mean, that's always a question. Yeah, but he should tell them when he shows up. I mean, technically, the community's decision is binding upon him no matter where he goes. They don't put a big scarlet letter on his chest. They don't tattoo him. They don't email ahead to let people know what's happening. But there would have been word of mouth in many communities. And so, yeah, cherem was a big deal even outside. But yes, many people would move to escape cherem at different points in Jewish history. But the point of cherem was not to punish the person. The point of cherem was to bring the person back. Right. Well, to show the whole community that what they were doing was beyond the border of the community, but ultimately to try and bring the person back in. And it was only unfortunate that occasionally a person would die before that redemption had happened.
They're unredeemable.
No, they are redeemable.
Not after they die.
So after they die, it's more complicated.
I have a problem with this. When we go to every year, we go outside to the cemetery,
Right?
we take a stone and we put it on the stone grave. How this works with this case?
You don't put the stone on the aron, on the actual coffin.
on the coffin.
Yes.
Oh.
Right.
So,
On
so
top of
once it's
Yeah.
buried, nobody
Exactly.
can see it.
And the stone that we put on the marker is for the matzeva. It's for the marker.
Wow.
It's not meant as a sign of disrespect. It's meant to make sure the marker doesn't go away. It's perpetuating the memory, not desecrating it. All right, we got to do 5-7.
So can I
Or I'll
ask the
explore.
last question, sorry?
Yes.
When you guys communicated, okay, no one can talk with you, no one can do business with you.
Right.
So how can live in a community when and no one buy or sell any product from him? How can
So maybe you should change what you're doing.
But in his case,
So-
the wife work.
Right. So
And
well, historically,
family.
what would happen would be the family would be the go-between, or the person would deal with non-Jews because they didn't care who we said was in cherem, and a person could limp on. But the whole idea of cherem is it was supposed to be hard, right? That was leverage to change their opinion and change their behavior. All right, let's get back to Akavia because we want to finish with his story.
At the time of his death, he said to his son, retract the 4 opinions which I used to declare. A, he, the son, said to him, why did not you retract them?
All right, so he tells his son as he's about to die, you know those 4 opinions that kept me from being the head of the Sanhedrin? You should not follow those 4 opinions. You should follow the majority, right?
Oh, really?
Don't continue the way I did. And the son's like, what? Why didn't you stop? Right? You're telling me to stop, but you wouldn't stop. What's going on?
He said to him, I heard them from the mouth of the many, and they heard the contrary from the mouth of the many. I stood fast by the tradition which I heard, and they stood fast by the tradition which they heard. But you have heard my tradition from the mouth of a single individual, and their tradition from the mouth of the many. It is better to leave the opinion of the single individual and to hold by the opinion of the many.
All right. I mean, yeah. I mean, Akavia is a great guy. I mean, I love the way he teaches.
But why? He came back
No.
kind of.
Well, he was trying to help his son by helping him see the perspective that this isn't just about me being right or them being wrong. I have to be true to what I heard, and I heard this from many people. And you know, when I was a student, this is what I learned, and they heard it from their teachers, from many people. And so their majority versus my majority, there was no way for me to give up what I had learned for theirs, because they were equal weight of majority. But now in this generation, I'm the only one who has this opinion, and they all have the other opinion. So you, my son, you have learned from me, and you have learned from them, and there are a lot more of them.
Yeah.
Right? So why should you stick to the single opinion of me when you should be able to learn from all of them? And that's his resolution, which again, in Eduyot as a whole unit is the beautiful point of, we preserve the minority opinion, but we generally go after the majority in order for there to be a harmony and unity in Klal Yisrael and the whole people of Israel. And this is a good example of him saying, don't be stubborn and stick to my way just because it's our family way. Go by the majority of the community way. That's what you should be doing. And for your generation, the majority is their opinion, not mine. In my generation, it was mixed. But in yours, it's pretty clear which way the majority is. But he only could do this as he's dying, because he could never ask his son to disrespect him while he was still alive by not following his teachings. Because that would be so dishonorable to his father, for the son not to follow the teachings of his father
And what
while he was alive.
what if the son was a Rosh Yeshiva and he taught his fourth thing to his students? So now become to be also majority.
No, because there's still only one teacher.
More than one.
There's still only one teacher. Just because there are lots of people who heard it from him doesn't give it, because it's generational, doesn't give it the weight. Having lots of students doesn't mean your opinion is the majority opinion. It has to be the majority within your generation. Yeah. All right. So finish it up.
2. He said to him, Father, commend me to your colleagues.
Could you write me a letter of recommendation to all the other rabbis?
He said to him, I will not commend you.
Oh, Dad, come on.
He said to him, have you found in me any wrong?
Right, why? What have I done that's so bad that you won't write a letter of recommendation?
He said, no, your own deeds will cause you to be near, and your own deeds will cause you to be far.
Right? Being a leader in the community is not about who wrote your letter of recommendation. To go all the way back to our discussion of meritocracy before we began, right? Being a leader is who you are. If you are a good person, if you have good deeds, you will be drawn near and you will rise to the top. And if you don't, you won't. And a letter from me shouldn't make the difference, right? My recommendation should not make the difference.
But you know, that's really good, because it's teaching him to be responsible
Mm-hmm.
and to grow in knowledge.
Exactly.
Obviously, because he has to grow in the knowledge of the Torah to be able to merit that when he wants.
Exactly.
So it's kind of cool.
Even though historically there are hints of aristocracy within Jewish communities where certain families can tend to dominate, there was always still a necessity of meritocracy, and the ideal was always meritocracy. And although we might give preference, as I said before we began, to all of the things being equal, if you had two people, one who had a strong family background and one who didn't, if they were equal in every other way, we might give preference to the stronger family background. But if the one without the stronger family background was the better sage, that person was supposed to rise to the top.
That reminds me of that Mishnah, that the two people that were not very important. What were they doing? They were
The two, I think it was the gate, the guys near the dung gate. Yes, who resolved the debate between Hillel and Shammai, because Hillel and Shammai couldn't agree on what it was. But the two guys at the dung gate, they could agree.
So that's kind of cool.
Yep. All right, we will finish there for tonight.
Hey, Rabbi, I had a